The sun was setting on the horizon of Green Hill, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, when an old blue Ford F-100 covered in red dust stopped in front of the Golden House. The noise of the diesel engine echoed through the town's main street, causing the elegantly dressed customers occupying the tables outside the restaurant to frown in disapproval. John Miller turned off his pickup's engine, adjusted his worn straw hat, and observed the imposing facade of the establishment through the dusty windshield. It was undoubtedly the most luxurious restaurant within a 200-mile radius, frequented by the cream of local society and businessmen visiting the region. He got out of the vehicle unhurriedly, his worn boots raising a small cloud of dust as they touched the asphalt. He wore a simple plaid shirt, faded jeans, and a belt with a buckle that had long lost its shine. He didn't care about clothes. To him, what mattered was a man's character, not his appearance. Outside the restaurant, ladies in designer dresses whispered behind their wine glasses, while executives in expensive suits disguised mocking smiles. A young woman at the nearest table couldn't contain a giggle when she saw the mud stain on the newcomer's right boot. "He's certainly lost," murmured a pearl-necklaced lady to her companion. "He must be looking for some dive bar in the outskirts." John pretended not to hear. In his 55 years of life, he had learned that silence was sometimes the best response. He walked with firm steps to the restaurant entrance, where an impeccably dressed host received him with a look that mixed surprise and disdain. "Can I help you?" asked the young man, barely hiding his discomfort. "Good evening. I'd like to have dinner," replied John with his deep and calm voice, typical of country men. The host exchanged a nervous look with the maitre d', who approached quickly, as if wanting to avoid any kind of embarrassment. "I'm sorry, sir, but all our tables are reserved tonight," said the maitre d' Pierre, a thin man with a French accent, possibly as fake as his tan. John looked around the dining room, noticing at least half a dozen empty tables. "I see," he replied simply, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Perhaps you'd prefer Mrs. Betty's restaurant 3 blocks from here," suggested Pierre, with a condescending smile. "The food is more local." Again, John just nodded. "Thank you for the suggestion." He turned on his heels and left, leaving behind muffled laughs and malicious comments. What no one knew was that this simple man, who had just been politely expelled from the Golden House, was the new owner of half the productive lands in the region. John Miller, or simply Mr. John as he preferred to be called, had started his life as the son of migrant workers, worked since childhood in the coffee plantations, and with much effort and intelligence, built one of the largest agribusiness groups in the country. He returned to his truck and drove to a simple diner nearby, where he was greeted with a genuine smile by the owner, Mrs. Betty, a lady in her 60s who served the best chili in the region. "Mr. John, what a nice surprise," she exclaimed, wiping her hands on her apron. "I thought you were going to have dinner at that fancy restaurant today." "Changed my mind, Mrs. Betty," he replied, sitting at the counter. "I prefer sincere company and honest food." As he savored his dinner, John thought about the events of the night. It wasn't the first time he had faced prejudice because of his simple appearance, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But tomorrow would be an interesting day. The next morning, the news spread through the town like wildfire. The mysterious businessman who was buying land in the region and planning to invest millions in new agro-industrial projects would make his first public appearance. The Golden House had been chosen as the venue for an important business lunch. The restaurant owner, Marc Dupont, a Frenchman who had actually been born in Peoria, was in a frenzy. He gathered the entire team early, giving specific instructions on how they should treat this special client. "We don't know what he looks like, so I want you to treat everyone, absolutely everyone, as if they were millionaires," he ordered, nervously adjusting his bow tie. Pierre nodded effusively, already imagining the generous tips that could come from this new client. Little did he know that his day would be very different from what he imagined. The morning dragged on slowly, with the entire restaurant staff in a state of nervous anticipation. Every time the door opened, everyone straightened up, expecting to see some businessman in an Italian suit and leather briefcase enter. Around noon, A familiar sound echoed down the street, the diesel engine of an old blue Ford F-100. The same people who had laughed the night before now watched open-mouthed as John Miller parked his truck in front of the restaurant. This time, when he got out of the vehicle, still with the same dusty boots and worn hat, he was greeted by a completely transformed Pierre. The maître d', who had despised him the night before, now smiled from ear to ear, practically bowing as he opened the door for him. "Welcome to the Golden House, sir. It's an honor to receive you," exclaimed Pierre, guiding him to the best table in the restaurant, near the panoramic window overlooking the garden. The other customers watched the scene with curiosity, especially those who had witnessed the events of the previous night. Some were beginning to make the connection, and their faces gradually changed expression as they understood their mistake. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. The waiters at the Golden House silently competed for John's attention, each wanting to be the first to serve him. Marc Dupont, the owner, emerged hurriedly from the kitchen, adjusting his jacket and running his hands through his graying hair as he approached the table. "Monsieur, it is an indescribable honor to receive you in our humble establishment," he exclaimed, extending his hand effusively. "I am Marc Dupont, owner of the Golden House. Please allow me to personally present our menu to you." John observed the man calmly, recognizing in him the same type of person who had always judged him by appearance. "Thank you, Mr. Dupont. Was here last night, but unfortunately all the tables were reserved." Marc's face instantly paled. Beside him, Pierre looked like he was about to faint. The awkward silence that followed was broken only by the sound of cutlery falling somewhere in the kitchen. Last night?" stammered Marc, beads of sweat beginning to form on his forehead. "But that's impossible. There must be some mistake. Pierre, did you attend to this gentleman yesterday?" The maître d', who moments before had been melting into smiles, now looked like he had seen a ghost. I... Monsieur, if I had known... If you had known I was rich, you would have treated me differently," John completed, his voice maintaining the same calm as always. "Is that what determines how you treat people here?" At the next table, the same young woman who had laughed at his boots the night before was now hiding behind the menu, her face red with shame. Other customers pretended to be absorbed in their meals, but it was evident that everyone was following the scene attentively. "Please, monsieur, accept our sincerest apologies," begged Marc. "Allow us to compensate for the terrible misunderstanding. Your meal today will be on the house, naturally." John shook his head slowly. "I didn't come here for a free meal, Mr. Dupont. I came to do business." He paused, observing the reaction of those present. "As you may know, I've acquired several properties in the region and intend to invest significantly in local development. I was looking for a place to hold meetings and corporate events." Marc's eyes shone with the prospect of future profits, but John continued, "However, I need to be sure that my business partners, many of them simple country people like me, will be treated with the same respect as any other customer." At that moment, the restaurant doors opened and Mrs. Betty entered, looking somewhat out of place in her simple floral dress. John had invited the diner owner to join him for lunch. "Mrs. Betty, glad you made it." John stood up to greet her. "Please sit with me. You'll be my guest today." The lady smiled shyly, clearly intimidated by the luxurious environment. Pierre, still pale, automatically pulled out a chair for her, although his smile now looked more like a grimace. "Mr. Dupont," John continued, "I'd like you to meet Mrs. Betty. She owns one of the most beloved establishments in town and is an excellent cook. In fact, I'm thinking of proposing a partnership with her to develop a line of regional products that will be distributed nationally." Marc's eyes widened as he realized the business opportunity he had let slip away. Mrs. Betty, in turn, seemed not to believe what she was hearing. "Mr. John, are you serious?" she asked, moved. "I've never been more serious, Mrs. Betty. You built your business with hard work and treat all customers with the same respect, regardless of who they are. These are values I admire and intend to maintain in all my ventures." The woo News of John's presence at the restaurant had already spread through the town, and gradually more people began to gather outside, trying to peek through the windows. Among them was Mrs. Betty's son, Luke, a young agronomist who had just graduated and dreamed of working on innovative projects in the field. John noticed the movement and smiled as he recognized the young man. "Ah, that's your son, isn't it, Mrs. Betty? The agronomist. Please ask him to come in. I have a proposal that might interest him." As Luke was called to join them, Marc Dupont and Pierre remained standing, like statues, watching their world of pretensions and appearances crumble before their eyes. The Golden House, which had always prided itself on being the most exclusive establishment in the region, was about to receive a lesson on the true meaning of class and distinction. The conversation that followed during lunch was not just about business. John shared stories of his childhood in the fields, the challenges he faced, and the people who helped him along the way. He talked about his project to transform the region into a sustainable agriculture hub, combining traditional techniques with cutting-edge technology. Luke, initially shy, soon became animated when he realized that many of his ideas about regenerative agriculture and social development aligned with John's vision. The young agronomist had innovative proposals for training small producers and implementing agroforestry systems, projects that could now come off the paper. Meanwhile, the other restaurant customers, who had previously looked down on simple people, began to rethink their prejudices. Some even approached to introduce themselves and participate in the conversation, discovering that they had much to learn from those they had previously considered inferior. The news about the lunch at the Golden House spread through Green Hill like wind on a stormy day. In less than 24 hours, the story of the agribusiness entrepreneur who had taught the local elite a lesson in humility was already the most talked-about topic in cafes, markets, and even in the fields surrounding the town. John, however, wasted no time with gossip. The next morning he was already at his model farm, located 20 miles from the center, receiving Luke to discuss the details of the project that would transform the region. The young agronomist had barely slept due to so much anxiety, arriving half an hour before the agreed time. "Mr. John, I brought some ideas I've been developing since college," said Luke, spreading maps and documents on the rustic solid wood table that occupied the center of the office. "Here's the planning for an integrated production system that can benefit small producers." The businessman watched attentively as the young man explained his project with passion in his eyes. It was the same sparkle that he himself had when, still young, he dreamed of revolutionizing the way agriculture was done in America. "You know, Luke, many people think success in agribusiness is just a matter of having money and technology," commented John, adjusting his inseparable hat. "But the real secret lies in understanding that the land and the people who work on it are our greatest wealth." Outside the office, a group of rural workers waited anxiously. They were small producers from the region who, upon learning of John's plans, came in search of guidance and possible partnerships. Among them was Mr. George, a 70-year-old gentleman who struggled to keep his small property productive amid the pressures of large farmers in the region. "Come in," called John, noticing the movement through the window. "You arrived just in time. Luke here has some ideas that might interest you all." The office soon filled with men and women from the countryside, some still with dirt on their boots. Exactly like John when he entered the Golden House. Luke, initially nervous about the responsibility, gained confidence as he saw the genuine interest in their eyes. "The idea is to create a cooperative different from anything that's been done in the region," explained the young agronomist, pointing to his maps. "We're going to integrate organic production with cutting-edge technology, but maintaining the traditional knowledge you already have." Mr. George, who had remained silent until then, raised his calloused hand. "Son, that's very pretty on paper, but how is a small producer, who can barely afford seed, going to invest in technology?" John smiled, already expecting this question. "That's where I come in, Mr. George. My group will provide all the necessary technical and financial support. In exchange, we want you to be our partners, not just suppliers." The meeting extended throughout the morning. While Luke explained the technical aspects of the project, John shared his long-term vision. It wasn't just an agricultural project, but a plan for social transformation that would start here in Green Hill and could spread throughout the country. In the middle of the afternoon, Mrs. Betty appeared bringing snacks for everyone. Her simple restaurant was already different. A line formed at the door since the news of her future partnership with John spread, but she remained the same, treating everyone with the same affection as always. "Brought a hearty coffee for you all," she said, arranging the table with cakes, cheesebreads, and her famous empanadas. "People who work need to eat well." As those present took a break for coffee, Marc Dupont, the owner of the Golden House, arrived at the farm in his imported car. He seemed out of place amid the simplicity of the environment, but his countenance showed that he had come with a purpose. "Monsieur Miller," he began, after being invited in, "I came personally to apologize for the inadequate treatment in my establishment and, well, I'd like to propose something." John signaled for him to continue, while serving a cup of coffee to the Frenchman. Marc hesitated when he saw that it was the same simple coffee that everyone was drinking, but accepted the cup with a forced smile. "I thought a lot about what happened and realized that my restaurant needs changes. I'd like to open the doors for events that celebrate local culture, maybe even include regional dishes on the menu." Mrs. Betty, who was listening to the conversation, couldn't contain a smile. It was the same person who days before had turned up his nose when she went to the Golden House to deliver a pastry order. "You know, Mr. Dupont," Luke intervened, "we have several producers here who provide high-quality ingredients. You could start by including their products in your restaurant." The suggestion caught Marc by surprise. He looked around, observing, for the first time, the faces of those people he had always considered below his level. In his eyes was a mixture of shame and discovery. Of course. It would be an honor to work with local producers," he replied, beginning to understand that the true transformation of his restaurant would need to go beyond the surface. John observed everything with satisfaction. His strategy was not just to change the agricultural scenario of the region, but also to transform people's mindsets. And there, that afternoon, in the simplicity of his office on the farm, he saw the first seeds of that change beginning to sprout. A year had passed since the old blue Ford F-100 had first parked in front of the Golden House. Green Hill was celebrating its first Sustainable Harvest Festival, an event that brought together producers, technicians, and visitors from all over, the country interested in learning about the project that had transformed the region. The central square was unrecognizable. Modern stands displayed agricultural technologies alongside demonstrations of traditional cultivation techniques. The aroma of freshly roasted coffee mixed with the smell of homemade bread coming out of the oven. Mrs. Betty, now at the head of a network of regional restaurants, coordinated a team of cooks who prepared typical dishes with local, organic ingredients. "Look how interesting this is," Luke explained to a group of agronomy students from various universities across the country. "These seedlings are cultivated using a system that combines traditional indigenous knowledge with artificial intelligence monitoring. The results are impressive." The young agronomist had become a national reference in sustainable agriculture. His project, initially designed for Green Hill, now served as a model for dozens of other cities. But he never forgot to mention that it all started with a lesson in humility in a French restaurant. Marc Dupont, in turn, circulated proudly among the event guests. The Golden House had become much more than a refined restaurant. It was now a meeting point, where businessmen, farmers, and local residents gathered on equal footing. The old social divisions that had so marked the town seemed to have dissolved like mist under the morning sun. "Mr. Anthony," called Marc, spotting the businessman in his typical simple attire, "I need to show you something special." He led Anthony to his restaurant, where a photo exhibition had been set up. The images told the story of Green Hill's transformation, starting with a photo of the old dusty pickup truck parked in front of the establishment. "This exhibition is our tribute to a man who taught us that true elegance has nothing to do with appearances," said Marc, emotional. "Each photo here tells a story of change, not just in agriculture, but in our minds and hearts." Anthony observed the photographs in silence. There were recorded the crucial moments of the last year. The first meeting with small producers, The inauguration of the organic fair, the beginning of the technological training program, the celebrations of the first successful harvests. One image in particular caught his attention. Old George, once so disbelieving, proudly explaining his production system to a group of visiting farmers. The man who had almost lost his land was now one of the most sought-after instructors at the training center. You know, Mark," Anthony finally said, "when I first parked here, it wasn't my intention to teach anyone a lesson. I just wanted a quiet dinner after a day's work." "But you ended up teaching us the most important lesson of all," replied the restaurateur, "that people are worth what they are, not what they appear to be." Outside, the festival continued. The Green Hill Cooperative had become the largest supplier of organic products in the region. More importantly, it had transformed into a community where everyone supported each other mutually. Zelda, who now ran a regional gastronomy training program, was training young cooks from all over the region. Her simple restaurant had transformed into a school restaurant, where traditional techniques were preserved and passed on to new generations. "Look, Mr. Anthony," she said, serving him a cup of coffee. "Who would have thought that that day at the Golden House would change so much?" Anthony smiled, savoring the coffee produced by old George. "You always knew the value of people, Zelda. We just helped others see it too." On the stage set up in the square, Luke was presenting the results of the project's first year. The numbers were impressive. A 300% increase in small producers' income, significant reduction in the use of pesticides, recovery of degraded areas, creation of hundreds of direct and indirect jobs. But beyond the numbers, there was something more important, the sparkle in people's eyes. Green Hill had transformed into a place where dreams were no longer ridiculed, where dignified work was valued, where tradition and progress walked hand in hand. At the end of the presentation, Anthony was called to the stage. He adjusted his one hat, as he always did when thoughtful, and looked at the crowd applauding him standing. "A year ago, many here judged me by my appearance," he began. "Today, we're not just celebrating a harvest, but the fruit of a much more important seed, respect. We learned together that a person's true value isn't in the clothes they wear or the car they drive, but in the character they carry and the good they do for others." Anthony's words echoed through the square, carrying with them the promise of a better future. The old Ford F-100, still parked in its place of honor in front of the Golden House, seemed to smile, its red dust stains gleaming under the setting. Son of Green Hill. Dear listeners, we hope that Anthony's story and Green Hill's transformation have touched your hearts. To continue this journey of inspiring stories, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating narratives. Find it here, clicking on the left. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the power of social transformation. Don't miss our upcoming content. We await you in the comments.